Hello, I'm Melvin McLeod, the editor-in-chief of Lion's Roar, and it is my pleasure today to be joined by Matthieu Ricard. Matthieu has for many decades been a leading figure in Buddhism, both within Tibetan Buddhism, with his very close relationships with some of the most important teachers of this era, Tibetan teachers of this era, and in his presentations of Buddhist wisdom and knowledge to a wider audience. In particular, his looking at the intersection between Buddhism and Western philosophy and science, given his own background as a scientist, and in general, offering books of Buddhist teachings that all of us can benefit from. So, thank you very much, Mathieu, for joining us.
Pleasure to join you.
So, one of the main topics that you have written about, for which you are known as a, I suppose, advocate for, is compassion or altruism. And so let's start there. Later in this conversation, we'll be talking about the specific work that you're doing with an organization in Nepal called the Karuna Foundation. But let's talk first about the general role of compassion in human life and in human society. And I think that there is a sense that in the popular culture that compassion is a good thing, that it means being nice to people, but that it has a kind of limited role or place. But I would think that from a Buddhist perspective, we could say that compassion actually is a key, if not the key, with wisdom, transformative element in life altogether and in human society. So perhaps you could give us just a bit of a sense of what you see as the overall significance of compassion in human life.
So, just to take care of Buddhism first, shortly, because I think it's much, we have to widen up to all the challenges of our times. Of course, especially in the Mahayana, we say that wisdom and compassion are like the two wings of a bird that allow us to progress to enlightenment. And then the bodhicitta is defined as the altruistic wish to attain enlightenment, not just for the sake of enlightenment and that's it, in order to gain the capacity that we don't have now to free all sentient beings without exception from suffering. So that may seem a very unrealistic view. I mean, I heard some philosophers saying, this doesn't make sense. How you have to take care of your children and everything. How can you have this such a vast idea? But of course, when you wake up in the morning, you are not going to relieve the suffering of every single sentient being. But the point here is that you never exclude anyone from your heart. So your motivation can be boundless, unconditional, even wishing the bloodiest dictator, may that person's hatred, cruelty, indifference, greed be somehow eradicated from that person's mind. That would relieve a lot of suffering in the world. So no one should be excluded from our hearts. So that's the view of Buddhism. And that's why we try to cultivate that in various ways. So we speak often of four immeasurable ideas. Because why immeasurable? Because they address limitless sentient beings, they have limitless benefits, and so forth. So it starts, I think, within the vast sphere of unconditional benevolence. That's what's the basic attitude that should be. We wish nothing but the well-being, the happiness, the fulfillment of all sentient beings, and to find so that they find the cause of happiness as well, and they actualize happiness. So that's most general. No, of course, there are so many sufferings. So then when this unconditional benevolence encounters suffering, and we do that all the time, that benevolence become more specifically is an aspect of unconditional altruistic love, is the wish, may they be free from suffering at the cause of suffering, and we call that compassion. Now, There's also rejoicing and celebrating the qualities of others so that we don't feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of suffering. And then the last one, of course, is impartiality, that we cannot just, wish well and wish that people may not suffer if they are dear to us or if they treat us well or if we know them and so forth. We need to extend the circle because there's not a single being who wakes up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day and possible the whole year. So that's the basis, and that leads to bodhicitta. Oh, so now this is the Buddhist framework, and we say this is the royal path of the Mahayana. We say technically that Bodhisattva who achieve the first bhumi, the path of vision, they see the reality as it is, they see the emptiness nature of phenomena, they see the interdependence of phenomena, the union of appearance and emptiness, and what brings them from the first bhumi to the full enlightenment at the end of the 10 bhumi is the accumulation of goodness through compassion. That's the drive that makes us cross the other bhumis. Now, besides the Buddhist path, I think it's quite important, and that's why I was passionate for a number of years, 5 years of frantic research on the subject. I realized that consideration for others is the only way to address the challenges of the 21st century, because it is very difficult otherwise to reconcile 3 time scale. The immediate needs of a mother in Africa who main need is to feed her children in the week to come. And she cannot think of anything else. The environment, future generation is too much. It's a question of survival. Or people who are so preoccupied, by the end of the month, different things, how to survive and the economy and so forth. But there's also the midterm, that is a generation, a family, a career, a lifetime. And that, of course, every sentient being should be given the possibility to fulfill their deepest aspiration in life and not to be constantly frustrated, with their physical and mental integrity being harmed. And that applies to all sentient beings who can make difference between well-being and suffering. Not only human species, of course. There's 8 million other species who are, many of them has a quite refined consciousness. They have emotions. They definitely want to survive. And then there is a third scale, which is the longer term. Until recently, it was not so obvious, because 10,000 years ago, we were about 5 million on Earth. We already managed to eliminate all the big species very fast, wherever we came, the humans. Within 1,000 years, all the big ones were exterminated. But, no big deal. We could only throw things, and, our power was very limited, so the damage we could do was also limited. But that's no more the case. We are 8 billions with the technological, scientific, industrial revolution. Our power has been multiplied millionfold, but our care has not been following up in the same magnitude. And so now we are the architect of our future in a big way. We enter the Anthropocene, and the fate of future generation is in our hands. So now imagine that, except some nuts and psychopaths who don't care about anything, we have majority of people would like to live in a better world. Okay, now if you put them around a round table and you have social workers who face who deal with extreme poverty, exclusion, homeless, and so forth, poverty in the midst of plenty and all these things, and then people who make decisions that affect society over 10 years, 20 years, politicians, investors, who knows, common citizens, and then scientists who are sort of utterly dismayed because they know what's going on. They have told us many times what's going on. And then, yes, we know there's a climate emergency, climate crisis, but no one gets together in terms of governance to do the what is really, really needed. We might have 5, 6, 7, 8 years that we could possibly mitigate. It's not going there. Since the last COP, there has been still increase of CO2, so we are not getting there. So they're very frustrated. So now, how can you make them work together for a better world? Of course, selfishness is not going to do the job. The Homo economicus is the one who maximizes personal preferences, basically in the short term. And then, my favorite Marxist, Groucho Marx, has said, what should I care for future generation? What do they do for me? Well, that's also what now some of the politicians obviously are thinking in serious ways. I heard a US billionaire telling on Fox News about the rise of the ocean and possibly in a dramatic way in 100 years. He said, I find absurd to change my way of life for something happening in 100 years. So obviously, he can't care a damn about his grandchildren, obviously. So selfishness will not do the job. So what will do the job? We could call it altruism, consideration for others, care. One of the founder of modern economy, Francis Edgeworth, said there's no place for compassion in economic system. Basically, it's not part of it. Well, you may say that as an economist or an investor, but today, if you say I don't care about extreme poverty, I don't care about future generation openly, I think it doesn't work very much. So the idea is consideration for others is the magic thread or the Ariane thread that can reconcile the three time scale. We can take care of poverty in the midst of plenty and not spending 5 billion to go 5 minutes in space with a few friends, while we could put almost all the kids in school that are not in school with 5 billion today, as someone did a few years ago. And so we could take care of the commons, the quality of the air, of the atmosphere, of democracy, of advancement of knowledge and science, for which the voice of reason that is very cherished by economists would not suffice. We need the voice of care. And if we care seriously for future generation, that we will not wreck the planet because they will say, you knew and you did nothing. So whether we see it from a Buddhist perspective, as altruism and compassion being central tenets of Buddhist practice, combined with wisdom that helps you to take the right way of enacting this compassion to make it fulfill its purpose. We also have this much broader perspective of bringing compassion, in the outer world, both for the twofold accomplishment of others' happiness and our own happiness, and for addressing the main challenges of the 21st century. So I see that's why it's not a goody-goody concept, an idealistic, utopian concept. It's actually the most pragmatic solution that we can ever think of. And even in those days where there's so much suffering, so much confusion, so much civilization shift and cruelty, if you say, okay, no, it doesn't work, your altruism is outdated, let's play the game of selfishness, no, that's not going to help. More than ever, we need altruism in such conditions. Even we are facing incredible adverse circumstances and forces, but this is not the time to give up.
So you used the phrase earlier, our highest aspirations, that people should be able to fulfill their highest aspirations. And I believe actually that our highest aspiration is to be compassionate, that we all want to love and to be loved, and that pretty much every philosophy, whether so-called secular or religious, has told us that compassion is a central quality that we need in our lives. And yet we don't do that. We don't manifest it. We don't live it, even though it may indeed represent our deepest aspirations and, in fact, the true nature of our hearts. So, and particularly Buddhism might be helpful in this regard. Are there specific methods that we can use, whether they're contemplation or forms of acting or meditation, that can help us to realize the compassion that we know we need and that, in fact, at the deepest level we long for?
Well, when I was writing the altruism book, a friend of mine lives in Paris and who is well, as many intellectuals and scientific friends, he used to, when I came to Paris for a short time, he used to organize dinners with philosophers, scientists, so that I could ask them questions about the research I was doing on altruism. And once I met a very intelligent French philosopher, André Comte-Sponville. He's very respected here, very clear and limpid thinker. And he said, Matthieu, all this meditation and all that thing about becoming a better person, that's not going to change anything. Because why? Because we say we are the same human beings as Aristotle. Aristotle thought that slavery is great because 100 people makes 1,000 people happy. And we now think this is a barbarian. Human beings didn't change, institution changed. So your staff is not going to go anywhere. So, he's a very powerful thinker. So on the spot, I didn't know what to say. Then later, I reflected and I wrote a chapter based on what that triggered in my mind. I said, yes, we are the same as Aristotle. We have the same genes. Human genome has not changed for number of tens of thousands of years. Only one gene to use lactose. That's as far as we know. So there is no more altruistic or less altruistic gene in human being. But not only institutions have changed. If we born today in a culture where slavery, torture, and all this injustice, oppression is considered absolutely should be out of the way, and we educated in this, of course, our brain will be different. That means we will be different. Even the expression of our genes through epigenetic will be different. So we'll be different sentient beings. And that's ignoring also what we call the evolution of cultures, which is a Darwinian phenomena, but it is about culture, not about genome. So there's a book called Faster Than Genes by Bond and Richardson that is very interesting because it shows that within a generation or two, we can change our way we are, the culture, our values. Like in the end of the 18th century, 10 people in England said, okay, we should abolish slavery. They were very respected people, but everybody laughed in the House of Commons. They said, come on, it's impossible. The British Empire will collapse. So 10 years later, the idea became so strong, so obvious, it was perceived as so morally wrong to continue that slavery was abolished. So there's the power of ideas, the power of changing cultures. So that's why it's possible on the cultural level. So now, which is very interesting and why meditation and training is absolutely relevant, is that how does that work? Well, first of all, you are born as a human being and you have the capacity to change. That's now we know through neuroplasticity. Modern science acknowledges that. And in the Buddhist practice, we know that basically for 2,500 years, that's our main specialty of Buddhism is to transform oneself. And that is possible. How is it possible? Through training, practice. We are not born learning how to read and write and play basketball and chess, solve mathematical equation. We went to school for a long time. Then we do advanced training, professional training. Of course, we learn languages, everything. So by which kind of mystery, the most fundamental quality of human beings like altruism, resilience, inner peace, inner strength, the capacity, wisdom, and all that will be either at the top from the beginning or unchangeable, like grave set in stone. That will be a complete exception to every other human capacity and skill. So, like any of capacity, like playing ping pong, tennis table, they can be trained. Attention can be trained, compassion can be trained, resilience can be trained, emotional balance, inner peace can be trained. So that's the point. And then what we need training means training. That means we cannot just expect, a magic bullet that in 3 points and 3 weeks, the secret of happiness. Someone asked me that once in India in a conference. I said, there's no secret. There's no 3 points. It's not done in 3 weeks. It takes whole life, but that's the best thing you can do to have a wholesome life. So yes, we can train altruism and compassion. And in a nutshell, we all have felt unconditional love and compassion for someone, a beautiful child, an elderly parent, our dog or something. And that means that for some time, a minute or so, we wish nothing but good to that person. May that person be, that little innocent child, be fully happy, be spared suffering, and you have a good life, a fulfilled life, meaningful life. From the depth of our heart, we have no other thought and wish for that child. But it comes and goes. We do something else. The child starts moving. So we don't do that for half an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours. Do that in retreat for a whole year. We don't do that. But that's the only difference. Meditation is doing the same thing, but over a certain time. So if you do it for half an hour, you generate that unconditional love for someone. You have no difficulty to feel that unconditional love. Then you maintain its quality. If you are distracted, you come back to it. If it declines, you revive it. You make it more bright. And then slowly you extend it to other children. And why stop at 12 years old? To other sentient beings. And what stops to humans? So on and so forth. And then in the end, with training, with familiarization, you can feel genuinely that wish for all sentient beings without exception. So that's training, and training works. Simply, we need to do it.
So I think one of the issues is that many people feel that compassion or altruism or selflessness basically requires that you sacrifice yourself for the benefit of others, and that can be painful, and that can be seen as the virtue of the essence of morality. But Buddhism has a concept called the two benefits, which means that which is truly of benefit to us personally, is also of benefit to others. And that which is truly of benefit to others is also of benefit to us. And the problem, therefore, is not necessarily one of the immorality of being self-centered. It's of lacking insight into what it is that is truly of benefit. Because if we truly understand what is benefit, then it's a benefit to everybody. And if we're caught in a misunderstanding what's of benefit to ourselves, say more money, more who knows, all kind of status, all that stuff, that doesn't benefit ourselves or others. So to what extent do you feel that basically the problems that we have with caring and compassion, with love, are not so much a failure of will or a failure of morality, but a failure to understand what is truly of benefit to human life, and therefore benefits both ourselves and others at the same time? And that there is no dichotomy or choice that needs to be made between us and the benefit of others?
That's a very tricky question, because there are many trends of thinkers who are involved in, who will also interpret the way you answer that question. And first of all, there are those who believe that whatever we do, there's a selfish motive behind. Yes, there's someone wrote, "Scratch on the surface of an altruism, and the selfish will bleed." That means if you really look, you will find. That was predominant in psychology for many years until 1960s, where suddenly thanks to the works of Daniel Batson and others, it was shown that true altruism does exist. And so that's a good news. But still, it has been taught for a while. So philosophers have debunked that idea, because it can never be proven, because you can always imagine a selfish motive for something. So it cannot be disproved. The Karl Popper's idea that a good theory has to be, there will be some events that should disprove it. But if you find a selfish explanation to everything, no matter what happens, then there's nothing to disprove. There's another school of people who, okay, now the sacrifice aspect. This somehow a little bit in people, do good deeds out of sense of duty, because they have some moral imperative, because of maybe religious duty or some kind of sense of honor, and they think that unless you really suffer, it's not really altruistic, because well, it's not. It's just like you make it. If you don't suffer, then it's too easy to be altruistic. Of course, that doesn't make sense, because yes, you might need to make some sacrifice, but sacrifice has a very negative connotation. It's like you feel much less happy. Something is deeply missing in your life, and you sacrifice something that's truly good, and that sort of deprives your life of something important. But you could, in appearance, in appearance, it could be looks like a sacrifice from other people, but for you it's a great joy. I met someone called Bunker Roy. He was from a very high family in India. They thought he was going to go to the World Bank or become a minister. And he worked for 30 years in villages in very poor area in Bihar and Rajasthan, digging wells and everything. So when he arrived there first, the local people said, are you running away from the police, or did you fail your exam? And what? Someone like you is coming here. I said, no, I just come to help and dig wells and so forth. So he had the fantastic activities in Rajasthan. He founded what's called the Barefoot College, with illiterate women becoming solar engineers. It's fantastic. But from his mother in the beginning, his parents thought it's a sacrifice. He sacrificed a kind of career. So it doesn't make sense. But you might have some people might have to sacrifice, material things, or even, some of your health and everything, if you can save a number of people. So if you do it with full joy, there's not a sacrifice, it's a fulfillment. And then the other thing, there is also, so that's, we should get rid of it. It may cost you something, but if you do it happily, it's not a sacrifice. Now, the twofold accomplishment of others' well-being and yours, definitely, it's a very important point, but we must not forget it has been used by people who believe in universal selfishness. And actually, I heard a big CEO in a meeting in France, in a symposium, who just confided to me, I do a lot of charitable work, but basically I do it for me because I feel really good after doing it. So they say, the warm glow. You do that for the warm glow and for nothing else. But that's totally not true. Daniel Batson has put people in certain situations in the lab and show that they don't do it for the warm glow. And if you only do it, you heard that if you give a penny to a beggar while you feel depressed, you will feel very good, but you don't care a damn about that beggar, you are not going to feel anything. So it's a really bad argument that would require that to be altruistic, you should not rejoice, you should not feel good. Actually, it's the proof, in my mind, that altruism is so deeply rooted in our basic goodness. Because when we act out of anger, of spite, of jealousy, of selfishness, we might succeed, the Schadenfreude, and rejoice in our victory over that guy. But no, this is not genuine fulfillment and happiness. We are not making ourselves happy, and we certainly didn't make others happy. So it just actually confirmed that the basic goodness of human being is natural, that you feel good when you do good. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was not your main reason to do good. It comes as a bonus. So in that case, if it's a secondary effect, it doesn't make your motivation selfish. I've been talking a lot with Daniel Batson about that. It's a bit like I have an image, Buddhism likes a lot of images. When you grow a crop to feed your family, to feed the village, like wheat, you get the hay at the same time, the straw. So the straw you can use to make your roof or whatever, feed the cattle. So you didn't do the whole that to get the straw, but you get it as well as a bonus. So if you set about removing the suffering of others, then you also find fulfillment. But if you look at those who, save, there are many studies about a rescuer of persecuted Jewish families during the Holocaust. And it's ridiculous to say that they did that sort of idea of feeling good. They were putting their life and their family's life in danger. Sometimes they didn't tell anyone for 20 years after that. And of course, 20 years later, they said this is one of the most meaningful things I ever did in my life. But they were certainly not doing that for the warm glow. Someone who jump in icy water to save a kid is not going to think, I'm going to feel so good after that. So that's ridiculous. So yes, it is this is a win-win situation. It is the best way while working to relieve the suffering of others and bring happiness. This is also the best way to yourself have a fulfilled life, while selfishness makes yourself miserable. You make everyone miserable. It's a lose-lose situation.
Yes, I think it does come down to actually understanding at a deep level what truly makes us happy and what truly makes others happy. And at that point, we find that there is simply benefit. There is no dichotomy or tension between my benefit and your benefit. So let's turn.
The French writer Romain Rolland said, if selfish happiness is the only goal of your life will soon be goalless. That's very summarize the whole thing.
Yes. So let's turn now to your work with the Karuna Foundation, which does work in Nepal, which is just about to celebrate its 25th anniversary, and so we want to note that and talk a bit about that. So tell us a bit about the work of this foundation.
So it started, I've lived for 55 years now in the Himalayas, first in Darjeeling in India, then in Bhutan, then last 30 years in Nepal. And so at that time, I was living on hardly anything. Thanks to the kindness of my teacher, they would feed me. I had a 9 feet by 9 feet hermitage without heating and light for electricity when I was in Darjeeling for 7 years. But I was so fulfilled and happy to be there with my teachers. I could see the needs in terms of healthcare, of extreme poverty, but I had no way to do anything. Basically, I was living on the equivalent of $100 a month maximum. So then in 1997, someone got the idea that I should make a dialogue with my late father, Jean-François Revel, who was a well-known French philosopher. He's little bit known in the US for a book he did called Without Marx or Jesus, that was apparently a bestseller in its time. So that book, surprisingly or not, was a huge bestseller, translated in 25 languages and so forth. So then I saw a contract, I've lost track of all these things for a long time. And I thought, I don't need all that. I'm going to get in trouble I get with French government. I have to get back in the machinery of bureaucracy. And there's no way I can drive a Ferrari in the mountains of Nepal or Darjeeling. And there's no swimming pool in the Himalayan. It's too sloppy. I don't need this money. It's only trouble. So let's find a way to use it for a good purpose. So first we gave it to some foundation. Then we started Karuna-Shechen. So Karuna means compassion. And since there were already some Karuna in India, Bangladesh, and other Sri Lanka, we added the name of our monastery, Shechen. So basically, I dedicated 100% of all the royalties of my book since then, 100% of all conferences, of all photo exhibits. Basically, all my incomes went there, 100%. I lived because of living in cheap places, and as well, a little inheritance from my father, who also helped me take care of my mother, which for the last 5 years, she has absolutely nothing. So I used that for that, and I have enough to live in Nepal for the rest of my life. So anything in income, I gave it all. So, but of course, and then I met, thanks to monk and philosopher, a few philanthropists who told me, can we do something inside Tibet? Can we do something in India or Nepal? So we started actually inside Tibet, which is many NGOs can function there. And before even Karuna was founded, we did 40 major projects in Tibet, 20 schools, 20 dispensaries, number of bridges, with the help of a very few handful of dedicated philanthropists, including our dear friend in the US, Barry Hershey, and others. And so, but then obviously we saw we could do better. So we founded Karuna-Shechen as an organization in France. We did a branch in Hong Kong, in Switzerland, in the USA, and Canada. So it became a little bit more organized. And, we didn't have a 5-year plan and this and that, but over 25 years, organically, it grew and grew and grew and grew. And in the beginning, for 10 years, I was doing the account, the projects, the report, printing on my printer, sending to 20 people, and our budget was quite small. And today, mostly in India, actually, and Nepal, and a little bit still in Tibet, although it's very, very challenging. Now we help 500,000 direct beneficiary every year and 1 million indirect beneficiary, mostly eradicating extreme poverty, in the perspective of efficient altruism, that's the most impactful, but also basic healthcare, environmental project, veterinarian, solar equipment, bringing rainwater, preschooler, education to cooperative play, building schools, whatever is needed according the way the people express their basic needs. Like in Tibet, I never dreamt of we're going to build suspension bridges over the Yangtze River in Tibet. No, I thought, how can we do that? But, years after year, people were coming to us and look, there's no bridge for 50 miles. People drawn by trying to cross that on makeshift boats or through the ice in the winter. Some kids die. We need a bridge. So I said, well, government should make bridge, not us. But after many years, we say, okay, government is not doing it. So we did 18 bridges. So things like that. We really try to answer the needs of people. So today we have a wonderful team, mostly based in Europe, but also there's a head of, a country director in India. There's a country director in Nepal, a woman. And then I sometimes take care with a friend of Tibet, whatever we can do. And we have branches in the US. So there's a wonderful physician, doctor, who is now the president of Karuna US. And so yes, it has been thriving, I think, based on the vision that, accompany that with the also personal transformation. So our motto is to become better human beings, to transform oneself, to better transform the world and better serve others. And I think if you look at the grains of sand that sometimes freezes humanitarian work, they start with the good intention, to do good. But either we lack wisdom or some human shortcomings, corruption, this and that comes in. So one of the best training we could do to really, truly, meaningfully help others is to actually become a better person to start with, to develop compassion, resilience, that you don't expect people, praising you, this and that. You do it for building a school. And also you're not trying to make everyone perfect on the way. That's the job of the Buddha, not our job. So, so that has been very successful. Now I'm almost 79, so I certainly don't get involved too much in the day-to-day work. We have a wonderful team, but I'm still there, the old guy, show off whenever necessary. And just to mention the recent project that we are also supporting. Sometimes we do help other organizations. There's a fabulous doctor called Dr. Ruit in Nepal. With his team, they did almost 1 million cataract over 30 years. And from his own hand, he did 40,000. He's now 70. And the next 4 years, to complete his career, he wants to do with his team 60,000 cataracts in Nepal, India, Bhutan, Guinea, Mexico, North Korea. So we are dedicated quite a good chunk of resources to make that projects come through. So we have wonderful project and great people working with us. There are 200 people working in India, about 50 in Nepal, There are 10 in Paris, and then there are volunteers in all the other branches.
So I recently had the honor to participate in an event called the Festival of Faiths in Louisville, Kentucky, which does a lot of very good work and has excellent conversations about interfaith dialogue, spiritually catalyzed activism. And however, I was had a conversation with somebody over dinner one night while I was there, and she said that basically she had been leading a terrible and difficult life, and that the previous festival, the previous year, had turned her life around, had all but saved her life, and now she was back. And I realized that I said to the organizers of the event, well, you're doing a lot of very good work here and you're spreading a lot of interesting discussion and inspiration. But indeed, the fact that you turned around one person's life is really, in the end, all the justification, all the benefit you ever need. And, you know, and this gets to the kind of work you're doing and how we might look at it in the current framework. Because right now, for all the reasons I don't need to go into, we feel that the world is not in good shape, and certainly I feel is largely heading in the wrong direction. And indeed, that its momentum in the wrong direction feels at the moment strong and not easily turned around. And so there can be kind of discouragement in involvement and in beneficial activity, because the overall picture of human society, certainly the United States and many, many countries around the world, is not good and it's heading in the wrong direction. And yet, maybe in the end, that makes an even more important time to do the kind of work that you're talking about, where we build compassionate society from the ground up, one person at a time, one bridge at a time, one school at a time, one village at a time. And maybe until the time comes when we're ready again to start to move society as a whole in the right direction, it's a very good time to realize that we can now start to build that compassionate society from the bottom up in the way that you're doing. So, would you suggest that this is a particularly good time for us who may find broader scale political activism to, at this point, be perhaps for the moment not terribly beneficial, to focus more on helping people on the ground?
Well, of course, we could be discouraged. I have some French journalists, as I see from time to time, and they say, haha, you're altruism, look where we are now. So what do you have to say? And I tell them, what do you mean? You want to go for selfishness? Is it going to improve, to solve the terrible situation that we are in now with this epidemic of narcissism, of lacking consideration for others? I have a friend who is a journalist in the US. I did an interview with him for the New York Times last year. And he says, what can we do? And I say, well, certainly not give up. All the more, even though we're facing tremendous adverse forces, altruism is the only way. What else? What else can you choose? Now, about societal change, we should not underestimate the power of ideas, the power of change. And it's very interesting. When I was researching the book on altruism, I came upon a statistic about people were asked, are you ready to change your way of life because of the environmental crisis? So 20% say, no way. I'm going to drill. And then 20% say, yes, no matter what people do, I will do it myself. I will ride a bicycle, stop flying, and this and that. 40% said, I will do what the other do, the majority. I will, if we decide to, drastically reduce, the crisis of the superfluous, because that's what it is. When you know that a US citizen emits 250 times more CO2 than a Zambian, and a Qatari 1,000 times more than an Afghan, obviously it's not the Zambian and the Afghani that provokes the change. It's those who much too much, use consumption and renewable resources that are exhausted. The renewable ones are exhausted by the mid of the year, so depleting endlessly the earth of resources. Usually the number of the population of wild animals and wild birds have been reduced 50% over 30 years, not speaking about disappearing species, but just the populations. So everywhere it's like that. So giving up is not the way, but trying. So now, how does the change occur? How we get those 40% in our side? Well, it has to be a coherent, it doesn't need to have the majority to start with. As Gandhi said, in the beginning, they ignore you. In the middle, they fight you. In the end, you win if you have a strong idea. Satyagraha, where sometimes we say is the non-violent struggle of Gandhi. Satyagraha means the power of truth in Hindi. So what we need is to have a coherent, strong idea which somehow gain ground in society. And at some point, it's 15%, 20% of people have very coherent idea and that stick together, not like fanatics, but in a coherent, intelligent, compassionate way. It can bring up a tipping point. Just like the abolition of slavery was triggered by 10 people, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I knew Stefan Hessel, who was one of the who drafted it. He died 95 years old. Those 10 people managed to get that through. So things are possible. And then heads of states, of course, the problem is they always, as Winston Churchill said, a statesman thinks of next generation, a politician about next election. So we see that everywhere. So basically, a safety measure should be that any head of state should not be eligible to be re-elected so that they can take the right measures. Look what they did during the COVID. People accepted to be confined in their home, to stop traveling, this and that, because there was a clear emergency knocking at their door. So if just half of that determination and will from the population, will from the government could be put at the service of dealing with the environmental emergency, then we'll get somewhere. But it's not happening. So that's the problem. So, but we must not look courage. Otherwise, we just sit like survivalists and cultivate a nice garden that no matter what happens, we will survive. But that's not going to work for the whole humanity.
Yes, indeed. Without losing hope in the social progress as a whole, we can continue to help people one life, one village at a time, just as you're doing there, and build that model and that coalition of compassion also from the ground up around concrete projects.
Now, just one thing, for people who might say, what can I do? When I started again, I didn't have this big vision at all. I started with nothing, just the first royalties of my first book. Then people congregated and slowly, 25 years is a long time, but not that long. And now we're helping 500,000 people. Sometimes I feel I have nothing to do with that. I didn't really help 500,000 people every year with my hands. But somehow it happened to this catalysm of bringing people together, dedicated people, and everyone played their role, like really interdependence. So maybe, yes, I was the founder, blah, blah, blah. But frankly speaking, one person cannot do it. We have this saying in India, the kusha grass, they have this kusha grass, they make this broom. So if you, with hundreds, pieces of grass separated, you cannot clean the house. If you bring them together, you make a broom and then you clean. So an immersion phenomena is something that has more quality than the sum of its constituents. So altruism is like that. If you bring 100% of goodwill together, the result is much more powerful than just adding the little capacities of each and every one.
Well, that's very hopeful. So I want to thank you for this inspiring and fascinating conversation. I think really to go back to the very first question I asked you, which was, why is compassion more than merely a benevolent attitude that one could have as part of life? I think this entire conversation has illustrated has illustrated why compassion is indeed central to human life, to human happiness, to a good human society, and why it actually represents one of the key components of our human goodness. So I think that you know you've really been able to inspire us to be able to put compassion really at the center of both our own lives and of human society.
I want to share one thought with you before we conclude. You know, when I wrote recently Notebooks of a Wandering Monk, it's a testimony. It's not about autobiography. Who cares? No, I don't care what I did. But I met such extraordinary people in my life. Went 21 times to Tibet, spent 13 years nonstop with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, 7 years with my first teacher, Khyentse Rinpoche. So I didn't want that to die with my brain, what I witnessed, the quality of these human beings. But at the end of the book, I relate an anecdote that happened. I was flying in the plane and I saw a movie by the same friend, environmentalist, who said that it's too late to be pessimistic. It's called Home. And then, or Human, there's two movies. And in that movie, I saw it on the screen. I don't go to movie halls, but I saw it in the plane. At the end, we see flying over a big city, could be Tokyo or New York, and you saw all those buildings, 100 floors with many, many lights. And in every light, there is a family with its joy and sorrows. And I thought, why would they care a damn for that book I did on altruism that I spent 5 years of research? I feel so powerless. And then I reflected how, a small idea can gain strength. And if altruistic people come together, how they can achieve something. Like in Africa, for remedying to social ills like, genital excision, how someone who is committed and, inspire and then change the leadership of the village so that it's accepted. Like in Nepal, there's a place near India where there's no toilets for people, so women have a very hard time. So we managed to change the culture slowly, slowly, slowly with ideas and principle and bringing. So we should not be discouraged because somehow change is possible.
Well, that's a very good message to conclude on. So thank you very much, Matthieu Ricard, for
Welcome.
joining us. I'm Melvin McLeod. I'm the editor in chief of Lion's Roar.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you.